So today we're gonna take a look at all of the armament enchantments that exist in Elden Ring. There's 9 of them in total, split between 3 for sorceries and 6 for incantations, and they all provide different passive and active effects. At the same time, I'm also going to give a general opinion of which are the best and the worst of them, and also give a few guidelines how to make the most out of them under different circumstances. Let's begin with the sorcery related enchantments, including the Scholar, Frozen, and Unseen Blade. Now the Scholar is probably the one that you acquire earliest from Selen at any point during her main questline, either at the beginning, during it, or even after finishing it. Now this one adds a bonus magic damage to the weapon you apply this to, equal to 75% of the sorcery scaling of the staff you used to apply the enchantment in the first place. So say for example you have a sorcery scaling of 100 on your current staff, well 75 points of damage gets added to your weapon as bonus magic damage if you apply it like that. So what this means is that the more intelligence you stack with your mage build, the better the scaling of the staff is going to be, which translates in more bonus magic damage to your weapon. In this case, I've done a bunch of testing and it seems that Lusat's staff seems to give some of the highest amount of bonus magic damage to any weapon since it comes with the highest scaling, and not just that, it also seems to have an additional bonus to just magic damage in general compared to some of the other stats. Now this is the reason why this makes melee still very viable even in the end game, even if you play with a full mage, and it's actually desirable for you to maybe add a weapon in the mix, have a melee weapon to either make do when enemies get close to you or just surprise people in PvP and get a bit more damage on top of that, since you will obviously lack some of the other stats like strength and dexterity to make up for the damage of the base weapon itself. Given the fact that this lasts for a very long 90 seconds, doesn't really have any downsides with the exception if you fight against enemies that have magic resistances, and the fact that it's so amazing for mage class in general, both early and late game, makes this one of the best armament enchantments in the game. Now the next one is going to be the Frozen Armament. This is acquired from the Scarab behind the Caria Manor here on the north side on the main road. It doesn't really increase the weapon damage, nor does it affect the attack power rating. What it does is that it creates frostbite buildup with each subsequent attack once you apply it to a weapon. Now frost is actually desirable for a few reasons. One of them is because once the buildup happens, you deal a few hundred extra points of damage to the target, but then you also increase the damage that they take by another 20%, so once the build-up happens, you just deal 20% more damage against them. Intelligence seems to have no effect over the primary damage nor over the build-up. Testing this with 12, 48, and 99 intelligence produced the exact same results, and it requires the same amount of hits, which is about 7 or 8 hits to proc with the current build that I have. Given the fact that there's almost no requirement in terms of intelligence outside of just having it equipped in the first place, I would say that this is a great way to apply to a kind of like mix-up build that just dips a bit into intelligence but mostly uses dexterity or strength to have this bonus effect passively on their weapon. The final one for the sorceries will be the Unseen Blade. Now this one doesn't affect attack power at all, doesn't really deal any more extra damage. It's purely for PvP, making your weapon invisible, and there is also a second spell that you can apply to your character to also make it invisible, but only in PvP. For the most part, this did not seem to affect PvE or just regular NPCs at all. You acquire this, by the way, from the Mirage Rise Tower right here in the Altus Plateau region in this forest. After finding 3 Phantom Crests within the same forest to complete the puzzle, open up that, Rise Tower and just make your way to the top, which will give you these 2 spells. Now, this brings us to the incantation versions of these, and there are 6 of them in total, all requiring a seal to apply them in the first place, and obviously they will scale up in damage to the incantation scaling of those seals. And let's begin with the Bloodflame Blade, which is one of the most amazing in the game. You acquired this from a Scarab just northwest of the Church of Rose in the Lake of Liurnia. This one applies both fire damage and a bleed build-up on each attack, and it lasts for 60 seconds. Now compared to normal ways of applying bleed, this is much easier to pull off and maintain, since it also slowly builds up that bleed over time following every single attack. In many situations actually, I've seen the bloodlust popping up even after I've already finished hitting the enemy, so that's quite a huge bonus. The important component here is obviously going to be the bleed. It's quite hard to determine its true value, but when applying it to a weapon with no innate bleed whatsoever and comparing that to a level 0 Uchigatana, it just needs 1 hit more to create a similar build up to that. So in this case, an Uchigatana has 45 bleed by default and requires about 6 hits to proc the first bleed with no other buffs. In the case of the Bloodflame, that's about 7 to 8 hits for a similar effect, so we can estimate that the bleed build up provided by the Bloodflame would be around 30 to 35 alone. That's why this is best to couple with an item that already has innate bleed on it, like the Uchi Katana or other katanas in the game, a few select other swords and also scythes that kind of feature the bleed by default on them. Now the problem is that Arcane, which is the stat that is supposed to affect bleed buildup and it does affect the one on the blood affinity, doesn't seem to affect the bleed from the Bloodflame, at least not in PvE and not from my testing. Meanwhile, for the fire damage component, this one increases your weapon's attack power by 40% of the incantation scaling of your seal, so the more faith you have, the more fire damage you will get with this, but obviously you will not want to use this incantation with faith builds because there's way better solutions out there with way better enchantments that have almost double the scaling of this one. This is purely for bloodlust builds, I would suggest at least, and yeah, there's other solutions if you want attack power for faith builds. Which brings us to the Blackflame blade, a great alternative. This is found from a prayer book in the fog room at the Stormveil Castle early on if you make your way in this fog room closely to the courtyard and use one of these stone keys. It gives you a 0.65 incantation scaling as extra fire damage and it lasts for 6 seconds. Now there's two damage components for this one. The primary damage of the weapon that gets affected by the flame, and there's also a flame dot, a damage over time that immediately triggers for a couple of seconds after its initial application to the target. It's also good to note that the damage over time in this case is about 30% of extra damage on top of the one provided by the bonus attack power, which gets activated over the course of 2-3 seconds once you hit a target and the burn just affects them. So that's a nice bonus damage that brings it on par to some of the highest damage dealers for these types of effects in the game anyway. It only lasts 6 seconds though, but it has a quick application, so I guess that makes up for the extra damage. Now at number 6 we have the Order's Blade, which is something you acquire quite early from at the round table or by using his bell bearing at the Maiden. This enchants your weapon with holy damage for 90 seconds, giving you a bonus of 0.75 of your incantation scaling. Now this thing seems to scale off the best if you use seals that also purely scale off faith. So if you use something like a hybrid, say Golden Order seal, which is supposed to maybe like, at least according to lore, buff this, you're actually going to get way less bonus damage if you were to compare this with something like the Earth Tree seal. It's not that it can work with a hybrid, it's just that you're getting like way less scaling in terms of damage. This seal also requires 13 points in intelligence, most probably because of lore reasons. This also means that it's not the best option out there since you're wasting quite a few levels for extra intelligence, especially for builds that might not need extra intelligence. If you do, then probably it's not a problem, but there's way better solutions than this, which brings us to the Electrify Armament in a bit. The only thing I want to say more about the Order's Blade is that it's probably the best option against skeletons, since for the most part they can't revive if they get hits, and they also get like bonus damage from the holy damage. So in catacombs or any places with graveyards, this is probably your best source of damage. But the Electrify Armament, as I've said, is a much better version of the Order's Seal, since it does not require any additional intelligence, just 15 points into faith. Just like in the case of the previous one, this one also lasts for 90 seconds, also has a weapon damage increase equal to 0.75 of the incantation scaling of your seal. It's just that it's not going to one-shot those skeletons or keep them from reviving, but otherwise for pure increasing your attack power and going in with a hybrid, and I've already covered this in the Zeus build from like a week ago, this is probably the best option to electrify your armament and increase that damage by a significant margin. It seems that the Gravel Stone Seal provides the highest damage increase with this one, since obviously it scales the best and it increases that attack power by a huge amount compared to some of the other options in the game, even with the pure like faith options that exist. But that's obviously for the Electrify Armament and for bonus attack power, so if you are running with a build that relies on spell damage from faith, you're gonna still want to like have that faith, but you can always mix and match and always switch around the seals. By the way, this is acquired from the Roaming Knight on the road just south of the Artist Shack right here in Liurnia, and you can then bring that prayer book either to Corin at the Round Table or Miriel at the Church of Vows, and they can sell you this right away. Now at number 8 we have the Poison Armament. You get this pretty much from just north of the swamp area in Caelid from one of these invisible beetles, but in this case it seems to be one of the weakest armaments in the game, at least in my opinion. It's not going to provide attack power similarly to that Frost Armament, and instead will rely on the build-up of poison. It's also the cheapest in the game at just 10 faith, so literally almost anyone could use it. The poison works a bit different than anything else. You will apply a damage over time that lasts for a very long time actually, and eventually can rank up to hundreds of damage with 0 upgrades into anything. Now that being said, this seems to be the lowest and the weakest version of a poison effect that exists in Elden Ring, providing only 7 points of damage per tick, but it lasts for a good minute or two until you reach about 500 to 600 total damage. But there's better versions of this, including a Venom version, which seems to be like the upgraded version of the poison. This one would provide about 14 points of damage over the course of 1 or 2 minutes, and there's also a third tier of it that can provide up to 24 points of damage per tick for like 2000 plus damage over the course of like 1 or 2 minutes again. But that being said, if you spend that long on fighting bosses, I'm not sure you're doing it right. Like, it could work maybe in PvP or in like group setups when multiple enemies attack a boss and just want to like stack dots and then be able to dodge away and run into something else, but you're gonna want to like swiftly take down bosses in Elden Ring, and maybe poison could be buffed or changed a little bit. And finally at number 9 we have Vyke's Dragonbolt, acquired from the mountaintops by defeating Knight Vyke here from one of these bonus levels. It does require 23 points into faith, so it has a bit of a high requirement. It lasts for 70 seconds and still grants an extra attack power of 0.75 of your incantation scaling, but at the cost of greatly decreasing your lightning damage resistance. So that's almost like 35% decreased lightning damage when you have this applied. It also adds about 15% increase in equipment load, so that could be a great way to maybe have more to be able to carry on your shoulders, maybe even decrease that roll from medium to low depending on how much you have equipped on your character. Sadly though, this is just a weaker variant of the regular Electrify Armament. It is the cooler version of that, I will admit that. It definitely adds 100% increase into the cool factor, since it also affects your body, not just the weapon. But I don't think that you will want this for anything than purely just amusement or, well, role-playing purposes, since obviously the Electrify Armament is just the way better version that does not come with any of the downsides. Overall, these are all of the armament enchantments in the game. If I were to make a top of these, the best one would obviously be the Electrify Armament for just pure damage, followed by the Scholar, which is another amazing one. Also, that Bloodflame is coming in close at number 3 for bleed builds, and at number 4 I would probably put the Blackflame, since it's so amazing and fast to apply and still provides a great damage and synergy with some other spells in the game. We will cover that differently in different videos. Now, of course, this is it. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys in the next one.